Thanks.
I'm sorry, I have notes just because I'm scared to forget everything, but I will try not to use them too much. Sorry. Oh, yes. Yes, thank you. I thought it was your background. Thank you very much. Okay. Hi, nice to meet you. I come from the same lab as Mathieu. I'm a first-year PhD student, and I will tell you about my project. A lot of the work that we do in our lab has to do with predictions and how they can facilitate perception. Actually, your perception is not a passive process, but really an active one, where your brain is constantly trying to predict upcoming sensory events. And so I like to start with a little example of how priors can facilitate your perception. So if you don't mind playing the first sound. Okay, it was a bit low, sorry, but it's a degraded speech that it's hard to understand. But now if we prime your perception with the original audio.
The Constitution Center is at the next stop.
We can now go back to the first version and you should have no problem. Thank you very much. Yeah, maybe that wasn't clear, but some of the past work that we did in the lab has shown that actually these predictions facilitate perception even at low levels of sensory processing. And we showed that, for instance, how do I point? Never mind, here, that having predictabilities in the methods that we use to assess hearing thresholds actually bias the results in significant ways. In the project that I want to talk to you about today, we wanted to step away a bit from the purely mechanistic studies on prediction and take a broader approach and see how culture can sometimes tap into these predictive systems, here through the example of music. And so traditional views, such as those proposed by Robert Zatorre here, usually focus on the fact that music recruits reward systems, and actually that music elicits pleasure and reward through its interplay with our predictions. Actually, composers will often manipulate these expectations, and some work by Arno Zalta on groove and syncopation has shown that there's a sweet spot, actually, of the right balance of prediction and surprise that leads to the maximum pleasure. But while this research explains how music that you actively pay attention to can recruit your reward system, it doesn't really explain why we put music in the background, music that we don't actually listen to attentively, right? So this opens an interesting window for a new hypothesis that music recruits our predictive systems even when we're not paying attention, and it might act as a masking agent in stressful environments, such as, let's say, in an elevator. Okay. Before moving on, it's important to consider that silence is often considered as a neutral background, but actually we think that in certain contexts it can be anxiety-inducing. Okay, I don't know if that was stressful for you, but it sure was for me. So this discomfort maybe might explain why we choose to fill those silent moments with music. And that brings me to my key question, which is, how does background music, as compared to silence, influence our responses to stress? Okay. So we designed a study to try to investigate this idea that music can stabilize the sensory environment and reduce the emotional impact of silence. And so we recorded data from 30 healthy participants who are exposed to trials of 20 seconds of either background music, which was polyphonic piano music, or 20 seconds of silence. And during a third of the trials, at a random point towards the end of the trial, we sometimes played a super loud, startling sound. We collected EKG data, EOG, electrodermal activity, as well as EEG during this experiment. And we also had them fill out an anxiety questionnaire. So our hypothesis is that music might channel anxiety and lessen the startle response. Okay, so Before I get to the results, I'll start with a little disclaimer that these are super preliminary results, and there's a lot of stuff that we want to do still, including some pre-processing, but for now, I'll be showing you responses time-locked to the startling sounds, starting with the EEG data. So we found a difference in the global field power around 200 milliseconds after the onset of the startle, with a stronger global field power in the silence condition. And so interestingly, when we look at the EEG data, this aligns with some previous results that have linked the P200 components with an emotion-sensitive component. And so when we look at the EEG so far, it seems to go to align with our hypothesis that music will act as a masking agent. But however, the EDA results are a lot more variable, and they don't fully align with our expectations. So we observed a larger EDA response in the music condition, which goes against our hypothesis, but the difference wasn't statistically significant. And this could suggest that music heightens the emotional arousal, making the skin conductance more sensitive. But honestly, I wouldn't bank on that interpretation yet. The ECG results at the bottom here show a drop in the instantaneous heart rate immediately after the startle. And again, this goes in the same direction as some previous studies that have shown a similar effect. And perhaps at the end here, you can see that the heart rate seems to recover to a higher level than baseline in the silence condition, but we need to investigate this further. And to say a quick word about the EOG results, the average response here shows the expected blink trace, which is the slow modulation here, which is characteristic of the startle response. And we do have these little earlier peaks of faster activity that we think maybe could be linked to some fast transient muscle activity, but again, we need to dig more into it. So again, these are very early observations, and there's a lot we're planning to do still. So some of the stuff we want to do is to study the relationship between the anxiety using the STAI questionnaire that we passed to see whether music might have a stronger alleviating effect in our more anxious participants, like me today. We also plan to examine how music affects the alpha activity in the EEG signal as a marker of alertness to try to better understand how music changes the brain states in anticipation of stressful events. And finally, although currently the analysis treats music as a uniform background, we want to incorporate more complex models like the one that Mathieu just introduced and try to see how the physiological recordings that we have align with features of the music like uncertainty and surprise. Thank you very much. Sorry.